Welcome back to the channel. This will be my first draft for Fantasy Premier League ahead of the new season. I did a preliminary version using the website FPL.team, but there have been several positional changes, or at least some of the predictions weren't entirely accurate, so this video will reflect an actual solid squad set and ready for Game Week 1, but there will probably be multiple drafts covering different sort of structures with Haaland, Salah, both of them, maybe one with neither, because I think there are many different approaches ahead of the new season. And if you haven't already, join my league. The code is WFF0U7. There is a link in the description below, and if you were in my league last season, by using the same account, you sign in and you're automatically in my mini league. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, whether it's FPL, UCL Fantasy, and I also covered Club World Cup Fantasy during the summer. And check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, for access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. I would still highly recommend that you watch my preliminary draft and also the Key Changes podcast, because there's a lot of information in those two videos. But today, I'll be covering this first draft for Fantasy Premier League, and Kelleher, who was in my original FPL.team sort of building block squad, he will make way for Robert Sanchez. I'm still quite keen on going for a 4.5 million goalkeeper, and Kelleher would be one of the standouts. I think Petrovic would be the other, but that Game Week 1 fixture against Liverpool away would be enough to put those FPL managers off from investing in Bournemouth. And I think Robert Sanchez is a set and forget option, with Chelsea having good fixtures, and I think it's worth covering them defensively. I think Cucurella is going to be the template pick, but he is 6 million. You've got Levi Colwill at 5 million, and with this new system of defensive contributions and a few adjustments to the bonus point system, I think centre-backs are definitely viable now, even defensive midfielders, of course, and that's all covered in my Key Changes video. Now, my highlighted transfer in the defensive line will be Pedro Porro out for Virgil van Dijk, even over Frimpong and Kerkez, who offer more attacking threat in open play, particularly through the assists. But I think Van Dijk could still score more goals, especially from those set pieces, and he can get extra points from those defensive contributions. And last season, he would have comfortably outscored Trent Alexander-Arnold with that system in place. So I think he might be worth it. I also think in terms of the minutes, he will be far more secure than both Kerkez and Frimpong, who could be rotated occasionally, especially in the case of Frimpong. I think Bradley could have a surprising strong start to the season, and a lot will depend, of course, on how Liverpool do in these preseason games. But I think Bradley could look very sharp and start a few games at right back. There'll be no such qualms or concerns with Virgil van Dijk, so I think he's a send forget option until you wildcard. And of course, we have 2 of every single chip. Now, in the midfield, I am looking at this sort of transfer here of Morgan Rogers to Parma. Now, it's not as simple as that, of course, because it also means selling a somewhat premium striker, and in my case, I had Gyökeres in my FPL.team draft, but we haven't even seen him added to the game yet, and we are going to wonder what sort of price is going to come in at. But I think 9 to 9.5 million would be fairly accurate, and once that price is confirmed, I'll be covering it on this channel. But Cole Palmer had a great Club World Cup tournament. That's more like the Cole Palmer we're used to seeing, but he had a very poor 2025 calendar year in general, especially in the Premier League, with only 1 goal since January, and that was from the penalty spot against Liverpool. But the next 2 things I'm going to highlight here are positional changes, so to speak. And Jarrod Bowen, we all thought would be a midfielder, but he has been reclassified as a forward, and he does come in at 8 million, which I think is a fair price for him, but his appeal will definitely be reduced with that reclassification. You won't get those points for the clean sheets and also the extra point for scoring a goal as a midfielder. And a lot of people would argue, why is Salah still midfielder in FPL, but Jarrod Bowen is classified as a striker? Now, the sort of thinking by FPL is that Jarrod Bowen played as a forward in a 3-5-2 formation for West Ham towards the end of last season, but there were some injury problems there for the Hammers, and Jarrod Bowen will likely play on the right, as we saw in a recent preseason game. So he might be out of position in a negative sense, but I still think the fixtures combined with Bowen's form are still very appealing, and he's going to be one of the best forwards in Fantasy Premier League. But the last sort of reclassification, so to speak, is basically by FPL.team's prediction. They thought Joao Pedro could come in as a midfielder at 7 million, but he is a forward at 7.5 million. And I think after the Club World Cup, that pretty much reduced any chances of Joao Pedro being reclassified to that midfield spot. So I still think he's going to be extremely appealing and also very template. His ownership figure is already well over 50%. I think maybe we have been warped a little bit in terms of our idea about Joao Pedro's goal-scoring abilities because of his incredible start to his Chelsea career, and his goal-scoring rate isn't usually that prolific, but with Chelsea's fixtures and also their upturn in form over the last couple of months, winning the Conference League and the Club World Cup, I think going for double or triple Chelsea is the way forward. And if you aren't going for Cole Palmer or even Enzo Fernandez, I think Joao Pedro would be the sort of template pick in that Chelsea attack. So with all of that in mind, this will be my first draft for Game Week 1. And of course, there's going to be plenty more tinkering along the way. Now, between the sticks, it is Robert Sanchez. I'm quite keen on a 4.5 to 5 million goalkeeper, and he does come in at 5 million this time round, which I think is a very good price. And in terms of all the pricing in general, I think the goalkeepers have been spot on pretty much. You might point towards one or two examples that are maybe a little bit inaccurate, but I think for the vast majority, the pricing is really good there. And Sanchez does justify that 5 million price tag, and Chelsea are one of the favourites to finish in the top 4 and perhaps even challenge for the league title against the likes of Manchester City, Liverpool and Arsenal. But ideally, you'd want a set and forget goalkeeper until you wildcard, and that could slightly change. You could think a little bit shorter term because you've got one wildcard between Game Weeks 1 to 19 and then another, of course, between Game Weeks 20 to 38. That hasn't changed, but because we also have an extra bench boost, free hit and triple captain in that period, so one for each half of the season, that means you could maybe wildcard a little bit earlier or play things a little bit differently and not think too long term with positions such as these. But I'm still quite keen on having this position being unaltered until I wildcard. You don't want to be spending transfers in a goalkeeper or in the defensive line, and facing Crystal Palace at home, I think that's a fairly decent opening fixture for Chelsea, and they've got a strong record against the Eagles. Now, going into my defensive line, I've got a nice mixture of Virgil van Dijk, Wan-Bissaka and Van de Ven, who comes in at 4.5 million, and there is the temptation to go for a doggy instead. He had an excellent end to the campaign, particularly in the Europa League, and Spurs were dismal in the Premier League. We all know this, but I think over the last couple of months, they were basically fully focused on winning that Europa League, and that's what they did in the end. But I think they'll be much better in the league. They might even sacrifice some of the cups, and they might do worse in those competitions, but I would expect them to have massive improvements under Thomas Frank, and certain assets like Dominic Solanke could be very appealing this season. I think Wan-Bissaka was very surprising in the previous campaign, and he had a lot of goal contributions, which is something we never expected, and coming in at 4.5 million with West Ham having solid fixtures, whether it's short term, medium or long term, I think they tick all the boxes, and going for 2 West Ham players is definitely on the cards, but it's not something I'd recommend in terms of tripling up every single week. I think having a double up in fixtures like Sunderland away could be very appealing, and Virgil van Dijk with the defensive contributions, the goal threat and Liverpool's solid defence, I think he could be the best defender in the game. He was right up there last season with Milenkovic, Murillo and all these other options. I think Gabriel, if he stays fit, would be another contender, but Arsenal's opening fixtures are terrible. If you look at Liverpool's over the first 3, you might even argue they're tougher than Arsenal's actually, but I still think Liverpool, after that sort of period from Game Week 4 onwards, they have very strong games going into the future, and I think that's where the sort of fixture swing does take place, and Van Dijk is definitely worth the money at 6 million. I'm going for 5 midfielders though in my starting 11 in Salah, Wirtz, Palmer, Kudus and Ndiaye. So I've got 2 at 6.5 million in the latter 2, and Ndiaye is also on penalties. I think it could be very crucial in terms of the bonus points, and that's the main appeal about Ndiaye, who faces Leeds away in Game Week 1. And having 2 Spurs players does seem a bit risky considering how they did last season, and Kudus was poor for West Ham in the previous campaign, but facing Burnley at home, that is an excellent opening fixture. Then it's Man City away, and they tend to do very well against the Citizens, and I just think that only real doubt I have is the fact that the Game Week 1 fixture takes place 3 days after the UEFA Super Cup final against Paris Saint-Germain, so there could be some rotation there with Thomas Frank, and I think pre-season will definitely inform us of the best Tottenham assets. That could be a doggy over Van de Ven in that defensive line, and maybe instead of Kudus, Solanke will be the priority to cover their attack I think Cole Palmer is still the best Chelsea asset overall, but like I mentioned before, you've got Joao Pedro up front, Enzo Fernandez in the midfield, and Moises Caicedo now becomes a serious FPL option to start every now and then, particularly in the tougher games against Arsenal, Man City and Liverpool, where these defensive midfielders will have more defensive actions to do in terms of clearances, blocks and tackles, and that's only going to add to the bonus points, and they can also add 2 points to their score from those defensive contributions. That's all covered in my Key Changes podcast, and having two Liverpool attackers in Salah and Wirtz looks particularly appealing against Bournemouth at home, but then it's Newcastle away and Arsenal at home over the first 3 game weeks. But longer term, I do like this sort of play with 2 or 3 Liverpool players, and in my case, I've tripled up on the Premier League champions. And my last 2 players in the starting 11 are Joao Pedro and Jarrod Bowen, who are both fairly template, especially in the case of the Brazilian. I think the Club World Cup has definitely played a big part in that, and I would expect both of them to be very solid and consistent. But you've also got Wissa, who is linked with Newcastle, and I would fear for Brentford if they sell him because they just lost Brian Mbeumo, Christian Norgard, Flecken, and their manager Thomas Frank, but at least they made a very solid goalkeeper signing in Kelleher, but it could be a transitional phase for Brentford. There's also Chris Wood, Strand Larson, and a few other strikers like Dominic Solanke at a very similar price tag of 6.5 to 8 million that you can consider instead of Jarrod Bowen or Joao Pedro. But I do like this striker partnership at this moment in time. Now on my bench, I've got some solid options like Dubravka at 4 million. He could start games for Newcastle if Nick Pope gets injured and if they don't sign a goalkeeper. The likes of Aina and Konsa offer decent rotation in my defensive line and a lot of depth actually. So whenever I've got a tough fixture, I could always play around that way. But we might need to adapt our approach this season in Fantasy Premier League because sometimes a difficult fixture could mean more ball recoveries, or in this case interceptions, tackles and clearances, which will be crucial for defenders, and that means 2 additional points for defensive contributions. And Barnes only costs 4.5 million, and he's just there to sit on my bench and act as a facilitator and enabler. I'm never going to start him because in fact he didn't start a single game for Burnley last season. Fleming is their main striker. He comes in at 5.5 million, and if you want me to cover the newly promoted clubs in a separate video, then let me know down the comment section below. With the captaincy, it's a bit simpler. I've got Palmer, Bowen, and some decent options overall, but with a price tag of 14.5 million, I think Salah is the go-to captain, and his Game Week 1 record is sensational. I believe he has 7 double-digit hauls in Game Week 1 fixtures with 10 goals and 8 assists. All of those stats are covered in my preliminary draft video, so be sure to check that out. And facing a Bournemouth side without Kirkes, who joined Liverpool, also Dean Howson and Kepa Arrizabalaga, obviously that loan spell ended. I think Petrovic might be a decent replacement and all that, but there's a lot of changes in that Bournemouth defence, and Liverpool with a very strong record at Anfield and Salah's just consistency in Game Week 1 fixtures, I think he's a very solid captain and arguably the best of any player. Now let's talk about some prices very briefly. So Robert Sanchez was covered earlier, coming in at 5 million. I think that's a fair price for him. Virgil van Dijk at 6 could be the best defender in the game because of defensive contributions and goals from set pieces. I've got a few 4.5 million options though, like Wan-Bissaka, Van der Ven and Konsa, and those are the main 3 to rotate in my defensive line alongside Aina. Now I believe Murillo and Milenkovic will outscore Aina, but there's also 0.5 million difference in their price tags, but I still think he'll be a solid option in this defensive line. Now in the midfield, Florian Wirtz I think is criminally underpriced. He could easily be 9.5 to 10 million, but I think the new league factor does play a big part, and Cole Palmer comes in at 10.5 million, which is roughly where you would have expected them to be, and Kudus and Ndai are both 6.5 million midfielders, and of course Ndai was reclassified from a forward to a midfielder, which we all expected. Even websites like FPL.team also showed this as well. Joao Pedro and Bowen up front are template, but I think Joao Pedro is still worth that money, and Bowen is still going to be a solid option from now until the end of the season. But being out of position, that does put you off a little bit, in my opinion. He would have been one of the kind of standout midfielders quite comfortably, and now it gives you another option in that forward line, which is probably lacking a little bit with no Gyökeres at the moment at Arsenal, at least added to FPL anyway. And on my bench, of course, Barnes is pretty much irrelevant at 4.5 million, and Dubravka is there if needed, coming in at only 4 million. Now, let me know what you think of the prices. Do you like the new chips and also the added transfers for AFCON? And when I say new chips, of course, we basically get double of every single chip we had before, and there is no more assistant manager as far as we're aware. The last thing I want to show you is expected points, and Salah is comfortably top with over 7, and a few players don't really have a figure to really talk about, like Dubravka and Joao Pedro, but that will change very soon in the case of the Brazilian striker, and ultimately, I think the likes of Palmer would be highly ranked, and that's why he is one of my favourite options for the captaincy, but Jarrod Bowen is definitely a contender for that armband alongside Salah, Palmer, and even Wirtz, who could have a great opening game for Liverpool to kickstart his career there, but I don't think the others would be considerations for the captaincy. Even Joao Pedro would be an outside shout, but it's really between Salah, Palmer, Bowen and Wirtz, and I think that's the order of how things look like at the moment, but Salah remains number 1. I'm now going to go to the website fpl.team to visualize Game Week 2 and highlight some potential issues with this squad, and also present a draft for the free hit and explain why my chip strategy isn't locked in. There is certainly a debate that Game Week 2 has the worst fixtures of any single match day. I've got Robert Sanchez away to West Ham, the same goes for Palmer and Joao Pedro, so that's not too shabby, but if you look at my defensive line, my options are basically Wan-Bissaka against Chelsea at home, Aina away to Crystal Palace, Van Dijk facing Newcastle away, and that would mean a triple up in Liverpool with such a tricky fixture. I've also got Konsa and Van der Ven with kind of meh fixtures, especially Van der Ven facing Man City away. Despite Spurs' record against them, you'd still expect City to score a goal or create some chances, but maybe the defensive contributions could come into play. And in my midfield, I've also got Kudus away to Man City, and Ndai facing Brighton at home. Joao Pedro and Bowen, I mean, they're both facing each other. It's kind of meh. And I think with that sort of clash between Bowen and Sanchez, that isn't ideal either. And I've also got Barnes at home to Sunderland, but I'd only expect a cameo off the bench in that case. And that's pretty much all I have to look forward to. On a free hit, I think the main appeal would be tripling up on Arsenal, and that looks very solid, but the rest isn't that great. I could go for 2 Man United midfielders in Bruno Fernandes and in Mbeumo, who have solid records against Fulham, maybe Clive at home to Wolves, and go for a second or third Bournemouth player, but it doesn't look that appealing. Ollie Watkins has a brilliant record against Brentford, his former club, and instead of Havertz, I would go for Gyökeres, but that would mean downgrading somebody else because I would expect the Swedish striker to be priced significantly higher than Kai Havertz, but some people might disagree. A few viewers, of course, argued that Gyökeres should be between 7.5 to 8.5 million in FPL. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And on my bench, I've also got Troffert, the new signing there for Bournemouth. I've also maintained Aina and Barnes, but I could easily displace them, maybe even downgrade Aina to a cheaper option, and then spend more money in the starting 11 to upgrade Havertz to Gyökeres, for example, once he's added to FPL, or maybe just upgrade him and go to an even better player, and maybe even double up on the Arsenal defence instead. There are different ways of approaching Game Week 2, but I think the triple captain on Gyökeres or Saka could work even better. I'm just not as really enthused about these fixtures, and maybe the triple captaincy would be a better use of your kind of chip strategies and saving the free hit for later in the season, but you do get double the amount of chips in this campaign with 1 free hit, triple captain, bench boost and wildcard for the first half of the season between Game Weeks 1 to 19, and then you get another one for the second half of the campaign between Game Weeks 20 to 38. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Are you planning to bench boost in Game Week 1? What about the free hit? Are you looking to use it in Game Week 2 or perhaps even wildcard that early to chase some price rises? I've seen that sort of discussion take place in the launch stream that I did very recently, and it's good to see a bit of variation, but my fear is that in the second half of the campaign, with double Game Weeks and blanks to come, especially around Game Week 30, I think people will be very template in their approach, and I think that will be the kind of go-to strategy there. But at least for the first half of the season, we could see a lot of variety in our play, and that's always the hope with FPL. We have reached the end of the first draft video and podcast for Fantasy Premier League, and there'll be more headed your way throughout pre-season, different types of content, and every single game week I'll be doing deadline streams, reactions, team selections, transfer tips, and wildcards with the occasional free hit squad thrown into the mix. Chip strategies, you name it, everything you need to know for Fantasy Premier League will be on this channel. The same goes for UCL Fantasy when that game is released too. Now we have more chips in FPL, defensive contributions, and also AFCON transfers. So by the time we get to Game Week 16, everyone gets 5 free transfers, the tweaks to the bonus point system, and also the positional changes are all covered in my Key Changes podcast, so be sure to check that out. And thank you very much for watching this video and listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also the notification bell so you're up to date with my content for FPL and UCL Fantasy. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, further links to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you very soon for more videos and live streams in FPL, and keep your eyes peeled for UCL Fantasy content too.